everyone, and welcome to Unit 4. Thanks for coming here to listen to my lecture on supply and demand together. Before I get going on that lecture, I wanted to talk to you about the discussion board that's due in this unit. So you've done two other discussion boards. The first one was the voluntary extra credit introductory discussion board, and the second one was in connection to Unit 2. And in that discussion board, remember, you were creating your own economic proposal. In this discussion board for Unit 4, it's a little bit more formal. You will be reading an article, and then you will be answering some questions that are listed in the prompt. Just make sure when you create your own thread, remember you click on that icon that says Create Thread to start your own post. Make sure that you double check and to take care that you answered all the different parts of the prompt itself. So if there are more than one question that you need to answer, just make sure that you were really complete in your answer and you answered all parts. So you get a score for that. You also get a score for responding to another student. And what I'm looking for in this response is I'm looking for the fact that you read through their prompt and really kind of gave it some consideration. So you need to indicate in it that you read their prompt. This could be something like, I appreciate your thoughts, or I really liked this point that you made, and maybe you can have a quote from their prompt, but something that indicates to me that you read through their prompt and you kind of thought about what they had to say. Another part of your response needs to be promoting the discussion. So the way I usually do this is by asking a student a question. And so you could just say, have you thought about this? Or I was unclear about this section. So just make sure that all your comments are positive. You're not putting anyone down, but I do want to see that you read through the student's prompt, and I want to see some sort of constructive move towards a discussion. And again, usually that's in the form of a question. So you get a score for that response to a student as well. I would really appreciate it if your thread is created, your original answer to the prompt is created by Thursday. I know that there are some students that will be doing this late. I'll probably have you guys do an alternative assignment rather than go back into the discussion board. But for the rest of us, we need to have this done. You need to have your original post done by like Thursday. And that's so that everyone isn't just waiting until 11:30 on Sunday night and putting in their discussion board answer just to fulfill the task. It's a lot more fun to have a discussion. There were some great discussions that have happened in the last couple of discussion boards that we've done. So I look forward to seeing what you guys have, and again, I just encourage you to post early. I put a study guide for Unit 4 in the announcements as well, so make sure that you're taking care of all of the extra credit that I have to offer. A lot of you guys have hit that 50-point mark, so you're about halfway to the 100 points that you can get for extra credit. You will really be thanking yourself when you get to the end of this unit or end of this semester and you have those extra credit points that will kind of help you out when it comes to taking the final exam. So I think that's all the kind of classroom work stuff that I wanted to catch up on, and now let's talk about supply and demand together. So if you remember, the law of demand means that if you are selling a good and it's at a high price, that means that there will be low demand. It's an inverse relationship. That's why the demand curve is downward sloping. These are the determinants of demand. So remember, these are all the things that shift that demand curve to the right, indicating an increase in demand, or to the left, indicating a decrease in demand. There's a great example of future price and expectations in the news. This will be an extra credit opportunity too that I will post for you to read through the article in the Statesman about the gas tax that's going to increase tomorrow. So if we know that our gas prices are going to increase by 7 cents a gallon tomorrow, what is going to happen to the demand for gas today on Tuesday? Well, you can probably guess that it's going to dramatically increase. I would bet that everyone's filling up their gas tank today because they know it's going to be more expensive tomorrow. So that's a great example of future expectations. So that means that in our state, I would suspect the whole demand curve for fuel has shifted to the right today, indicating an increase in the demand. Okay, here's the law of supply. I'm not doing a separate PowerPoint on supply itself. I'm just going to briefly go over law of supply because we've already had the lecture and PowerPoint on law of demand. So everything is just kind of in reverse for law of supply. So let me just briefly go through this. When you look at law of supply, just think about it from the producer's point of view. So think if I own my own business, I would be the supplier. So would I want to sell my products for a low price or a high price? Well, if you know that hot dogs right now are selling for $5 a hot dog, you're probably going to supply more hot dogs because you want to sell more hot dogs at $5. So that means that your supply curve would shift to the right. High price means high supply. Low price means low supply, so that's why your supply curve is upward sloping. Demand curve is downward sloping. Supply curve is upward sloping. You're going to want to make sure that you carefully label your graphs that you have in this unit as well. You will get points taken off if you label your demand curve incorrectly. So just think demand goes down. They both start with a D. Supply goes up to make that X. These are the determinants of supply. So these are the things that shift the supply curve as opposed to the determinants of demand that shift the demand curve. So input costs, government influences, future price and expectation, weather, number of suppliers, technological advances, and changes in price of other goods. So input costs, you are selling hot dogs. The price of wheat, let's say there's a wheat shortage and the price of wheat skyrockets. Well, that's an input cost to the buns, so I'm sure the price of buns probably skyrockets, and that's an input price for your hot dogs. So you might supply less hot dogs because the price of wheat is so high, and that's something that you need to make your final complete hot dog. So if you have questions about any of these determinants, you can feel free to come visit me during my office hours or email me. These are all explained in the unit. You can also do a quick Google search on these things too, and you will find some helpful tips online as well. Okay, so supply and demand together graphically explains market conditions. So the law of demand and the law of supply contradict each other. We want to buy low, sellers want to sell high. How do we figure out how anything gets traded? Well, we find the equilibrium. This is the point where supply equals demand. So equilibrium is the market clearing price. It's where sellers are willing to sell as much as buyers are willing to buy. It's the perfect point. Essentially, it is this point right here. It's X marks the spot. That's the equilibrium price. Okay, so in this unit you will need to understand what happens if a price is set above the equilibrium and what happens if a price is set below the equilibrium. So we know that the equilibrium in this case is probably about $3. That's probably about the equilibrium price. But what if you want to sell your goods for $5? Well, let's see what happens. So at $5, you go from the dollar sign, walk it over. What curve do you hit first? The demand curve. And what is it? It's about 9 lattes. Then you go back to the price and you walk over to supply. Here's our supply curve. Our supply is 25. Okay, so quantity supplied at $5 is 25. The quantity demanded at $5 is only 9. So there's less demand than supply. So you have what is called a surplus. How much of a surplus? We can calculate this by taking 25 minus 9. Your surplus is 16 lattes. Your surplus you actually measure from that point to that point, and we know what those numbers are from our graph. So What about if, okay, so you know you have a huge surplus, and so you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll lower the price and see if I can find the equilibrium, so you lower it to $4. Well, at $4, you come over, hit the demand curve. The demand is 12. Then you go back over to $4, hit the supply curve. The supply is 20. So there's still a surplus, 20 minus 12. Okay, so what are you going to do as a supplier or a producer? Hey, I'm going to drop the price even more. Oh, look at that. At $3, my quantity demanded and my quantity supplied are exactly the same, and they're 15. So that's how you get rid of your excess surplus or supply. Okay, let's look at on the flip side. So you're selling lattes and this is your first time you've had this shop and you're thinking, hey, I'm gonna sell them for $1. I'll get tons of people that will want to come for that. Well, at $1, you start at the dollar, go over. What curve do you hit? Be careful with this. A lot of students want to say demand because they see that D. But look, it's the supply curve. So at $1, the supply is, quantity supplied is 5 lattes. But remember, the law of demand says they want to buy more at a cheaper price. So 21 lattes is what the quantity demanded is. So we have way more demand than we have supply for. We have a shortage of how much? Well, you take 21 minus 5 and you get 16 lattes again. So what is this producer going to do? Hey, they're going to raise their price. Okay, is there still a shortage? Yes, because any price below the equilibrium creates a shortage. So we go to the $2, go over, hit our supply curve. What's our quantity supplied? It's about 10. Then we go back to our $2, go over to the demand curve. What's our quantity demanded? It's like 18. So there's our shortage, 18 minus 10. Then they raise it, oh, and they find the $3, the perfect mark. So shortage is any price below the equilibrium. Surplus is any price above the equilibrium. Okay, so make sure that you understand this is the demand curve, this is the supply curve, and you say at 250 I go over, I hit that demand curve first, quantity demanded is 4. At 250 I hit the supply curve, quantity supplied is 10. I have a surplus of 10 minus 4, or 6. Okay, and you can see that on the shortage end as well. So, when we look at shifts in demand, okay, so here's an example of a supply and demand curve. I'm just going to do this first example. This is looking at the market for hybrid cars. Let's say that there's an increase in demand for hybrid cars, okay? So your demand curve shifts to the right because an increase is a shift to the right. What happened to equilibrium price? Look, it increased. So sometimes I encourage students to graph some problems, the word problems that they see. If they're saying there's supply and demand increases, what happens to price? Well, if you draw it out like this, just a simple X, and then you show, oh, there's my new demand curve, you automatically can see that the price increases. Look, there's supply. Let's say that there's an increase in the supply of hybrid cars. That's a shift to the right again. Okay, what happens though when there's an increase in the supply of cars? What happens to equilibrium price? Hey, it goes down. It's the opposite of when demand shifts. You can also have a shift in both supply and demand. Let me click to this last slide here because I only have 50 seconds left. These are basically going to give you some rules of thumb if you see a change in supply or a change in quantity supplied, change in demand, or change in quantity demanded. You can kind of review these terms and see what happens. If you go back to these slides, when you have both supply and demand shift, sometimes looking at equilibrium price and quantity can be kind of tricky. So let me show you this. I only have a few seconds left, so I don't have that much time to talk, but you can pause the presentation and read this example 3 here and read all the steps. and then you can read this final slide here. So here again are those terms. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around here at the end. Thank you for listening.